So I'm just today, March 18th, 2024, and we are recording this Parsha class, which we're going to devote to something related to the book of Esther. We have Purim coming up this week, and this will probably be our only chance to have a study on Esther. So the book of Esther, I'll start by saying we don't pay as much serious attention to this book as we should, for obvious reasons, because we have too much fun reading it, and because we create around the reading of the book of Esther the pageantry and the satire and the fun and the kind of slapstick around it. We tend to read the book as a droll piece of satire and kind of melodrama, rather than a serious take on political intrigues in a palace. And there's a whole political dimension to the book of Esther and its seriousness that we don't take. In addition, when we read the book of Esther, when we really kind of put it under the magnifying glass, we see that almost every verse makes a kind of allusion to other verses and other pieces of text. In a way, this is an approach to reading the Bible altogether, which is why the Bible can be so delightful and so enjoyable to study, and why it is for many people impenetrable. It's joyful to study because the assumption in reading the Bible and studying the Bible is that you have to know the Bible to study the Bible. You have to know almost everything else when you study it. It's a pretty steep task, because the Bible is self-referential. It's always, self-referential both in words, in context, and laws, and different kinds of things. And it's also thematically self-referential. And so you need to study it after having studied it, which means you have to study it your whole life. It's really that unique as a book, because it depends on the premise that you know it, which requires that you know it in order to study it. And that's the joy in it too. That's the frustration of it. That's one of the reasons why it's impenetrable to people, in addition to the fact that people like things served up to them, without the effort. So we're gonna try and go into just a few verses of this and get some joy out of studying these few verses, and try and ask some questions that I know personally I haven't asked about these texts, and I've read these texts, my whole life of maturity, since I've been a kid, and I have a certain personal relationship to this chapter. It was the first chapter I ever learned to chant. I remember as a young kid being approached by the Chazan Sheni of the shul, saying, we'd like to get kids to read the Megillah, and they gave me chapter 2. So from that moment on, I basically had it memorized, and I have a lot of the other pieces of the Megillah memorized over the years. And I've always recalled the opening verses of chapter 2, but never gave it the interpretive attention that it really deserves, and try to ask the question, well, what's going on here, and why is this important? And then, in terms of the story, it's not the climax of the story. It's not the main point of the story. It's not, where the plot, unravels and everybody meets their end. Those moments come later on. But the moments in chapter 1 and chapter 2 of the book of Esther set the tone for the whole book. and they set the whole frame of understanding of Persia, Ahashverosh, Mordecai, the place of the Jews, the precarious nature of their identities, etc. And then also they have a relationship to what is power, what is the monarchy, and what are the limits of power. And then when there is a vacuum of power, or when there is a certain kinds of uh, um, uh, you know, diminution of power, or weaknesses in the person at the top, how people around that person take advantage of it. And that seems to be the point here. That at the beginning of the book we see a figure, we get a character sketch of the king Ahashverosh, and there are elements of this king that are quite problematic in terms of his power, and that the people around him, because he has so much power, the people around him uh, either take advantage of it, manipulate it, abuse it, or challenge it in ways that he may not really understand, or use the power of their proximity to the king to satisfy their own needs. So I'm saying that all as prologue to just a couple of verses here. And as usual, we're gonna study only a fraction of what is there. Here we go. So this is chapter 2. There we go. Beginning of chapter 2, taking a brief dip into the Megillah, chapter 2. So the verse is like this. Achar hadvarim ha'ela, yeshoch chamat hamelech Ahashverosh, zachar et Vashti, v'et asher asata, v'et asher nigzar aleha. We're going to hold this verse for a second. This is the verse that is the title verse of chapter 2. Sometime afterward, when the king, when subsided the anger of the king, I have this done in a different syntax. He thought of Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Okay, I hope I'm getting my, just a second. Here we go. My screen is frozen. Just give me a second to clear out of things. I'll be right with you, Paul. Back to chapter 2. Okay, so sometime after the king's anger subsided, he thought of Vashti and what she had done. So I'm going to ask the basic question: sometime, how much time? Well, we don't know. It doesn't say explicitly how much time elapsed, but you can do a bit of a computation and see that the events that will happen later. The marriage of Esther takes place. So the deduction is that it's approximately 3 years. Okay. Afterwards, after what? Well, after the Vashti incident. What is the Vashti incident? The Vashti incident is the incident that opens the story, okay? And this is back in chapter 1. So, middle of chapter 1, it says, in addition, Queen Vashti, and I didn't put the Hebrew up just for the sake of brevity. Queen Vashti gave a banquet for women in the royal palace of King Ahashverosh. On the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, he ordered Mehuman, Bistah, Harona, Bigta, Avakta, Zaitar, and Karkas, the 7 eunuchs in attendance on King Ahashverosh, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing a royal diadem, to display her beauty to the peoples and the officials, for she was a beautiful woman. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, conveyed by the eunuchs. The king was greatly incensed, and his fury burned within him. Then the king consulted the sages learned in procedure, for it was the royal practice to turn to those who were versed in law and precedent. His closest advisors were Karshana, Shetar, Admata, Tarshish, Maris, Marsana, and Mimukan, the 7 ministers of Persia and Media, who had access to the royal presence and occupied the first place in the kingdom. What he asked shall be done according to the law. To Queen Vashti, for failing to command King Ahashverosh, conveyed by the eunuchs. Thereupon Memucan declared in the presence of the king and the ministers, King Vashti has committed an offense not only against your majesty, but also against all the officials and against all the peoples and all the provinces of Ahashverosh. For the queen's behavior will make all wives despise their husbands, as they reflect that King Ahashverosh himself ordered Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, the ladies of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will cite it to all your majesty's officials, and there will be no end of scorn and provocation. Please, your majesty, let a royal edict be issued by you, and let it be written into the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be abrogated, that Vashti shall never enter the presence of King Ahashverosh, and let your majesty bestow her royal state upon another who is more worthy than she. Then will the judgment executed by your majesty resound throughout your realm, vast though it is, and all wives will treat their husband with respect, high and low alike. The proposal was approved, and the king and the ministers and the king did as Memucan proposed. Dispatches were sent to all the provinces of the king, to every province in its own script, and to every nation in its own language, that every man should wield authority in his home and speak the language of his own people. I'll stop there for a second. Okay, so we read that, and on the one hand, one side of our brain, one side of the screen is reading this, as the story. Another is reading it with farce. That is to say, there's an implicit farce here, which is, did you ever hear such a thing, where a king has to command the wives to listen to their husbands? That's the joke. The joke of the whole story is that wives don't listen to their husbands, and they need to be commanded here to do that. So yeah, we could read it as farce, but we're choosing to not read it as farce right now, and to see a kind of absurdity here, and not the farcical absurdity, but the political absurdity of this. That here is a king who has no control over his wife, and therefore wants to have total control over women, when that is impossible. And yet that is the most tyrannical thing that can happen within both a single unit of a marriage and within a larger jurisdiction. Okay, so on the one hand, this is farce. On the other hand, this is an insight into the whole nature of the weakness of this individual. A weak individual has to assert dominance and control when that control it doesn't have any legitimacy. Okay, it has to enact or structure or create a whole set of legislation to control, because he doesn't have natural control. Think about, uh, uh, in the the opposite case. This proves the point, which is, in the best marriages, no one spouse controls the other. Okay, in the best marriages, and here, this is just observable by when you observe, people in good relationships. People don't tell each other what to do. They do things as a partnership. They do things not by controlling and by exerting control over the other spouse. And by the way, it goes from men to women and women to men. Sometimes it's it's not men controlling women. Sometimes it's very much women controlling men. So in marriages where the system is one of vulnerability and weakness, there is always a vying for power. Marriages that or relationships that seem to work in a different way work where one spouse is not controlling the other spouse, where there's a sense of partnership, despite the fact that the king is the king, The queen knows that she has a tremendous role. And so in this instance, you know, what is absurd and obscene here is that the king is, his weakness is a political weakness. He wants to show off power and grandeur by displaying his trophy wife, Vashti, who was, by the accounts of the text, a very beautiful woman. He wants to show her off. She is having her own banquet in her own precinct, in her own, and she is basically, presenting her own model of power, and somehow that's destabilizing to him. So he has to usurp that power and then take her and commands her to parade before the other men of the kingdom who are attending his party. She is to wear her crown. The text is not explicit. I don't think she is being asked to come. We in the presentations of the book, sometimes this is like Playboy. She's being asked to pose naked in front of everyone with the crown. That makes it a little too tawdry, but the text doesn't say that. The text just says, it may just imply that because it says, just come wearing your crown, but um, you're going to interpret it the way you want to interpret it. The point is, it's his by he demonstrates his weakness by trying to present himself as a powerful figure with a beautiful, beautiful queen. I find also fascinating, and there are a couple of hands here. I find also fascinating that there's a lot of sevens here. We make a point of noting sevens. It's the seventh day of the feast. The seven. He wants her brought in by seven eunuchs, and his seven advisors advise him this. And I'm sure there are other ways that seven is woven in here. And the reason for this is literary, and that is because, again, as I said, with the presumption that the Bible, that whenever there's a seven there, it's a kind of code for this is trying to be godly. This is trying to, and in this case, it's Ahashverosh in his insecurity of his power is trying to display more power and control, and the sevens kind of magnify a sense of his own sense of power. But I'm going to stop there. I know that Marlene, you had your hand up first, and then Susie, go ahead.
Well, as the king, he would have had soldiers. He could have forced her. He did not. He asked her, and then the whole situation just kind of melts away into some drunken stupor.
Okay, very good. It's a good point, and this is this goes to how power is exercised. Okay, look, we have plenty of examples of tyrants in the world. All right, and tyrants who understand the exercise of power, use it judiciously, and tyrants who don't, it displays their weakness. I'll refer to Vladimir Putin, okay, who is, the one du jour, right? He just won a landslide victory of 80 whatever percent of the electorate. I mean, how ridiculous is that? Because nobody else is opposing him, or puppet straw candidates are opposing. But the vile thing that was done was that he eliminated his major opposition a few weeks ago, and it's obvious that he eliminated him. And the question is, what does that do? Right now, he eliminates all the people who oppose him, right? And what does that does two things. One, it shows how powerful he thinks he is, and of course evil, and it shows how vulnerable he is, because any one of these people really could topple him in the right set of circumstances. So he's eliminating all these people who oppose him and exercising power in this way, when the way that this ends is with his own demise at some point, and will it happen? No. Well, he's tried to eliminate it. He's much smarter than Ahashverosh here, okay? But Ahashverosh is essentially a weak person and understands his own weakness and is trying to mask his weakness by pretension. And one of the ways is through the trappings of his wife. Susie, go ahead.
Yeah. So another teacher of mine pointed out that she's ticked off because he sends a message to her. He doesn't, so to speak, call her up and say, "Why don't you come to my party?" It's like he doesn't have that decency to approach her directly, and she's busy doing something else.
Well, that's also there's also an issue of respect there, and the infraction that she commits is that she disobeys him, so she humiliates him. But her humiliation of him is a result of her feeling humiliated by him in the way that you mentioned. I think that's just it's a beautiful, valid point. Ilana, go ahead. Unmute yourself. You have to unmute.
It's important to notice that her behavior would be a bad example for other wives in the country. Like she refuses her husband, and then other women will follow her behavior.
I think that's also correct, and you can see that the whole council around Ahashverosh is deeply worried about it. I mean, again, I want to take it seriously and not as farce, because we could read this certainly, as a farcical moment. But what they're saying is, uh-oh, look what happens. Here, the word is going to get out that the queen, violated the king's edict, the king's command, and women are gonna take their signal from her, as women do from sovereigns, right? And there's something deeply intuitive about the book and understanding that societies do take cues from their leaders, right? If the leader, I mean, after take your first lady, take Jackie Kennedy, okay? Jackie Kennedy was in her day a trendsetter in terms of style, right? People, began doing their hair like her. They began wearing her, the same, imitating her dress. And fashion designers understand this, which is why great interest is taken in first ladies' attire and other people who are in charge. They don't pay as much attention to men necessarily in what they wear. Okay, I mean, who could care less about who's the tailor for the president? Although that tailor is an important person, but and it may be open to criticism when when the commentators at things like, I don't know, public moments, the State of the Union or the inauguration, they refer to what the First Lady is wearing. Okay, I guarantee you, when the president is a woman, they'll refer to what the president is wearing and not what the first gentleman is wearing. They don't care what kind of suit the first gentleman will wear, but they care very much about that, and that's part of just human culture. All right, so people will take their cues in things like dress or costume or hair, etc., and they become styles. This is why there's an Elizabethan style, or there is a Georgian style, or there are epochs related to how things emerge. Um, think about, I don't know, we can go through all the presidents and go through different style moments in each one. And I think you get the point. So they are worried about her creating a ripple effect throughout the kingdom that's deeply destabilizing to the basic political unit in society, which is the family. How best to destabilize the family than to destabilize the control of men in the family? Now, that's a farce, but that's also true in the sense that if if that balance is upset, then everything is upset. The way civilization works, without being too sexist or misogynist sounding, is that it's not that one sex has power over the other. No, that has been the case. Is that there's been, up until modernity, an agreement between the sexes, and to a certain extent, there's still an agreement that there are roles that are played by each sex in the union, and that there's a partnership that where both partners overlap each other, that nobody has a total power over the other. That's the way it works, okay? And that's what the assumptions have been up until the point where they have been upset. No, we live in a different era with regard to the roles that men and women play, both in their marriages and in society. So and we are, of course, I think in a 50-year experiment on this as to how this is emerging. We are in a society that has reimagined these roles, and we've had good consequences to that and bad consequences to that. But that's what experiments do, okay, without getting too immersed in that. Go ahead, Marlene.
Well, the king didn't have the same kind of relationship with his wife as a romantic or a constituted marriage that has, you make some kind of a deal where you're going to behave in a certain way. He had power over her to begin with.
Sure, he did, and you're absolutely right. But if you look at marriages in the Bible, you'll see that there are roles that are played by the women in the marriage, and these roles are very, very significant. Abram and Sarah, we can say all we want about the two of them, but they do have very important roles together. The best example is Isaac and Rebecca. Isaac is a much more passive figure. Rebecca is a much more active figure, and you can argue that without Rebecca, there really wouldn't be a Jewish people, and on and on and on. You can go with that. Even David and Bathsheba, and we'll get to that in a second, because there are certain allusions in these verses to David. By the end of David's life, David is quite a powerless figure, in the sense that he's feeble. He's well on Baba Yamim. He's reached his expiry date, and then in that moment where the sovereign is weakened by just nature, who has power and who's going to exercise power? So here you don't have a sovereign who's weakened by nature. You have a sovereign, a king, who's a bit of a dolt and a bit of a thug and a bit of an idiot and a bit of a womanizer and an unsavory person altogether, and has certain weaknesses. And the people around him are getting the sense, they're finding where his weaknesses are too, and they will take advantage of that. Go ahead, John.
I think his insecurity is heightened because, as I understand it, his wife Vashti came from aristocratic family, and he was kind of a nothing. He was not, his family was not high in the social ladder.
Yeah, but he was rich.
So we have to set that for a different conversation, because it relates to extra biblical material. There are things that come outside of that. I'm just focusing on what's in the text.
But he
And
was rich. He owned all those provinces, So it wasn't that he didn't have any power.
No, he had tremendous power, but as I think everybody here knows, okay, this is one of the great lessons of being an adult. Being rich doesn't mean you're smart. Being smart doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be rich. Okay, I can't tell you how many people I've met through the course of my life who are very, very wealthy, but are quite stupid. Okay, and there are people who are very, very smart, but not too wealthy. Okay, and they don't correlate, and that's a good point here. It's not only that he's not smart, he's not politically smart. And this is, I guess, a theme, that the wrong people in power have disastrous consequences for the polity. Now, he's the king, so the king is the monarch. And so, you place in the monarch a certain trust just by the dynastic chain. But it could very well be that you get the wrong monarch. Okay, and a monarchy is not a self-corrective mechanism. We all kind of take a cue from the British monarchy. Well, so it's interesting how things evolved in the last century, because after it was Elizabeth's father. Elizabeth's father was George. George was the king because his brother Edward abdicated. Edward was supposed to be the king, but he was clearly not worthy to be the king. And so there was a correction there. The correction was that he himself abdicated. He was wise enough to abdicate, and George became. And then Nebuch, he died, George, and then you had this magnificent queen who came on as a young woman and reigned for these many, many decades. And there will never be another queen like that. She was magnificent. She was one of the great kind of gifts of that time. She had her critics, of course, but she kept a certain stability and an honor and dignity in the family and in the institution. Okay, it's not going to be matched by anybody in the rest of our lifetime. It's never going to happen. Ilana, go ahead.
Also about number 7, there are 7 feasts that are mentioned in the
Very nice.
Megillah.
Very nice.
And also, we can't ignore the fact that Ahashverosh had a drinking problem.
The drinking problem. So good that you mentioned it, and of course, we can get very, serious about the presence of drink and alcohol in terms of the decay and the corruption of the kingdom. It's something that I think we can be very attentive to, that in that environment, the fact that this is all taking place in that kind of circumstance really does not yield much promise for the kingdom. But that's not the central theme here. The central theme is well, it does destabilize the power. I mean, it's accessory to the whole destabilization of everything. Okay, let's go on. So we have that whole episode, and I just summarize it here. Vashti has her own banquet, 7th day, 7 units in a royal diadem. She refuses to come. Ahashverosh gets angry at her. He consults with his legal counsel, the 7 officers of Persia and Medes. Memuchan's brazen conclusion, not only against you, your highness, but against all the thing. And then the banning of Vashti, the finding of the replacement, the issuing of edicts, and the approval of dispatching it. And I conveniently made it into 7 stages, but you could argue it. Okay. His anger subsided. Keshoch chamat hamelech. Shoch is the word here, and it's a very rare word in the Bible, about 5 times in the entire Bible. And where does it come in the Noach? It comes here. God remembers Noach and all the beasts and animals with him that are in the ark. Vayaver Elohim ruach al haaretz. God caused a wind to blow on the land, vayashoku hamayim, and the water subsided. So kishoch hamelech, there is, in the Bible, the ear, you hear subsiding, calm, right? It's like the storm of waves and the calming of water. And then later on in Esther, we have another moment of the king's anger, which is in chapter 7, when they hang Mordechai on the tree. The tree that was prepared for Mordechai to be hanged on. That is when the king's anger subsided. The king, as we know in the story, the king became very angry. He finally, understands what's going on. He asks that Haman be taken out, and Haman is hanged. So Zacharat Vashti thought of Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. That's the first verse of the second chapter that we're focusing on. So I want to ask, as the text tells us this, what is this thinking about her? What is he thinking about her and what she had done and what had been decreed against her? What is his mood? Is he wistful? Is he lonely? Does he regret what happened? Is he stuck? And here, this is where I was like, we want to enter into the palace. We want to enter into the emotional state of the king and ask it, what is he? I mean, we could make it contemporary and say, is he going through a kind of period of loneliness and depression? After all, he had a beautiful wife, a beautiful queen. We don't know what the temperature of the marriage was. Who knows? But he's all alone now, and he kicked her out. In the interpretations, it has us believe that she was executed or whatever. That kind of makes it even worse. But assuming that she wasn't executed, that she was just penalized and sent away and really powerless to do anything. And the other piece of this is that by the edict, he can't retrieve her, right? He's not going to bring her back. So she's off in a colony of, I don't know, powerless women, and he's alone and he doesn't know what to do. And it's a complicated moment. And I raise these questions because they open us the possibility of interpreting regret, wistfulness, and a moment, in terms of politically speaking, this is a moment that everybody can see. You don't have to be an analyst to understand that this is a moment that someone's going to take advantage of. But I'm going to stop here. Susie, go ahead.
Yeah. So he's adult, we know that.
Okay.
And everything is about it's all appearance. He has this big lavish thing, everything, and he's a king. And a king has to have a queen, and now he doesn't have one. So it's like he has to, he's got to swear the whatever, the whatever that, it's it's the appearance. When you have a kingdom, you have a king and you have a queen, and now he doesn't have a queen anymore. So he's got to build that picture back up.
Exactly. Okay. So that's one part of it. One part of it is that I'm defined by this, this partnership, this related, by a queen, by stature. I need that to present myself to the world. And now, in this moment, I'm presenting, an unstable set of a system. But there's an emotional part to this, which is the emotion is loneliness. The emotion is also, the vulnerability, and I need to display power, and I'm not displaying power. I don't know what to do. All right, let me go on and point to one moment here. Okay, so again, subtlety, reading it. What had been decreed? Well, he decreed it. Okay, He was responsible. Zachar Vashti v'tasher asata v'tasher nigzar aleha. This is a kind of way to poke fun. The text is poking fun at him. You know, it was decreed against her, meaning it's the text, the narrator already says this man is passive to the advice of all of the people around him. Okay. And this man is not smart enough, not astute enough, not politically aware enough to understand that he had to act and that he could have acted in a different way around. Now, who is around him? Well, there were the advisors, there were the eunuchs of the queen, 7 eunuchs, and there's 7 advisors. But who's talking about this and who's going to make the suggestion? Well, interestingly enough, here we go. The next verse that catches my eye. Vayomru na'arei hamelech mishartav, yivakshu lamelech na'arot betulot tovot mareh. In Hebrew, said the king's lads, his attendants, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for your majesty. I'm going to go back to the Hebrew verse, na'arei hamelech. So we have here a picture. The picture is that the king in the palace has several layers of staff, okay? There are senior staff, advisors, a cabinet, as it were, and there are other kinds of servant staff, stewards, or what I'm going to call pages, people, young lads who are the king's kind of pages. They're little people here. Not clear exactly what we mean by lads, but if nar means what it means everywhere else in the Bible, it means a boy. And that is to say, not an adult. What I'm going to say is either an adolescent or a pre-adolescent. Now, the Bible and pre-modern times really doesn't have a concept of what we know as adolescence. Okay, you know, and this is it's a good theme to talk about anthropologically, that the whole notion of adolescence is really a modern understanding of development. When you think about traditional Judaism, we have childhood and adulthood, okay, which doesn't recognize that there's a whole period of transition, and that the moment you become an adult, as far as Jewish law is concerned, is bar mitzvah. And I might joke all the time to b'nai mitzvah is that the Jewish people has perpetrated a big con throughout history in claiming that 13-year-old boys are men. That's ridiculous. Okay, now could it have been true several generations ago? Well, it may have been true if at 13 you stopped your education and you had to work, and if your lifespan was only 40, which maybe 100 years ago, that's what it was. So you could think that at 13, at the beginning of sexual maturity, that's when you are a man. Of course, sexual maturity and emotional maturity are 2 different things. And so what I sense here, and when I'm giving a very hyper magnified reading of this text, is that here you have a group of boys who are the retinue of servants, the page boys of the palace, and they are saying, we have a great idea. Let's get young girls here. Okay. Let's get girls, because the king needs a girl. And what's the point? The point is as follows. Okay. There's a subtext here that I'm only saying it may not be plausible because nobody else commented on it the way I'm going to comment on it. I didn't see a comment like this anywhere else. Okay, so that already makes it invalid, but it may make it original. So the king's lads and attendants are saying, let beautiful young virgins be sought out to your majesty. These are teens, lads, and this is the inside palace. And now I have this whole thing about, Senate pages and parliamentary pages and the scandals that have taken place where with young boys in parliamentary or palace settings. Okay, the usual scandal is not male-female scandal, but it's actually male-male and supervisory males. At least in the case of the Senate scandal, the Senate page scandal, which took place several years ago, was an adult male senator having an affair with a young male page. Okay, notwithstanding that, we have the sense that these are heterosexual pages or lads who they see his vulnerability. They see the king's loneliness, or they're not stupid, okay? And they know his instinctive tendencies, that he likes women, and that he likes beautiful women, and that there is a rapacious quality to his character, that he can be abusive to women, in the sense that he nearly was with Vashti, in terms of taking advantage of her beauty. So they say to themselves, I can see, this is the way I construct the scene here, is they gather together and they say, listen, we're all alone here in the palace. And what do we want? Let's get some girls here. At least for us, it'll be fun. At least we'll be able to look at them. Who knows what will happen? But if we bring in all of the beautiful virgins of the kingdom, this is going to be a bonanza, not for him, but for us. Okay? Bring in a beautiful bevy of young women who will serve the king, and that'll have tremendous consequences. Okay? Which is that they'll get to look at them and watch them, do their thing and bathe, etc., and pretend, etc., and they will just enjoy that. And the king, he's not going to marry every one of them, maybe one, two, whatever. But this is going to mean that there'll be opportunities for everybody. You always have to think of your own enlightened self-interest. And in a kingdom where there is no altruistic purpose of serving the greater good, everybody's out to serve themselves. And this is my little political comment here, which is that you have a political system here that is not devoted to the mission of the kingdom of Persia. You have a political system where everybody's out for themselves. Now, I don't want to say that every political system has that, but let's just say, in a cynical view of politics, is that every person that gets involved is involved because of their own quest for power and their own quest for themselves. But in the altruistic view of political life, which is certainly part of the reason why people rise to power and want power, is because they want to serve beyond themselves, and they want to create things beyond themselves. They want to contribute to society, and they want to govern society based on ideas. So there's a political philosophy here at work, which is, or a question at work, which is, what is the underpinning of the palace of Ahashverosh? Is it about personal gain and power, or is it about altruistic governance? Well, it's obvious. It's about personal gain and power. Susie, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was thinking, as you were, they want to see some action maybe before they can become eunuchs.
Well, true, and that would be a even more radical, quote unquote, speculation, which is, these young boys, don't have much of a future, and they could end up like Memuchan or Sarsana or whoever it was, that is the Harvona, right? The eunuchs, these eunuchs who take no, it's Haggai. Haggai is the eunuch that is in charge of the women, where Esther goes and is put under his charge. And of course, the trusted eunuchs are there precisely because their capabilities have been eliminated. Ilana, go ahead.
Esther was chosen because of her being beautiful. That's all that was counted. So what you're saying is, yeah, they the most important purpose was to have beautiful women around.
Absolutely. And again, I would point, that makes it a farce and comical, but also makes it somewhat true in the sense that, it, I mean, how many, I was trying to look for examples of movies where, this is a theme, right? Animal House, which has become a classic, is on Netflix. So I happened to, dip into it. So there's a scene, it's very funny. The scene is where, the lead character, you know, they show up at the sorority, and he has the obituary of the girl, and he says, I'm looking for my girlfriend, and they say, well, oh, didn't you hear she died? Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. Well, and then she said, well, what can I do for you? Well, come and be with me, and by the way, do you have 3 dates for my friends? It's it's a scene that's really ridiculous, but it's like the oldest story in the book, which is boy meets girl. Boys want to meet girls, or boys on a team want to meet the girls and the cheerleaders. I mean, a lot of American popular culture is based on these motifs. Well, the reason why they're based on these motifs is because these are motifs in every culture, right? And if you have a group of young boys, what do they want? They want to meet a group of young girls. What's the best way to meet a group of young girls? Well, it's to tell the king, go find, you have our interests collide. You are interested in marrying the most beautiful woman in the kingdom, and we also would like to. We'll be happy with the rejects. If you've collected the pageant, the Miss America pageant, so to speak, from the okay, so you can win, you can get the winner, but we'll be happy with the runners up. Okay, so that's that part of the story, and then we'll here we go. So then there's more to this, though, and this is where it becomes very serious, and this is only one verse, okay, but you can see how in every single verse there are just layers and layers and layers of meaning. Yivakshu lamelech is an echo of the Book of Kings, the ailing elderly King David on the verge of senility, or in fact, he might already be senile at the beginning of the Book of Kings. This is an amazing story at the beginning. Here it is. David Zakein Now King David was advanced in days, and they covered him in garments, but they could not get warm. He's cold. So his servant said to him, let him seek for my lord a king, a nubile girl. He's gentle in the translation. She's a virgin, that she may stand in waiting before the king and be a caregiver for him. She will lie in your bosom, and my lord king will be warm. Okay? The Hebrew is just it's so much richer. Va'amda lifnei hamelech. She's going to stand there all day. She's going to tend to him. V'shachva bechekecha. And she'll rest with him. She'll lie with him. Okay? V'cham ladoni hamelech. And she will warm him up. Okay? So you got every time I read that, I go like, come on. Come on. Who are you kidding? King David? Are you kidding me? You're going to find a virgin woman, a beautiful woman, and like you think that's just she's going to just stand there with a towel and give him drinks or lie with them. But what's interesting, and if you read that text, just beyond those verses, you realize that there's no consummation. Avishag the Shunammite, that's the name of the beautiful woman. So he never consummates a relationship with her. And it goes to show you what the state of his life is, or his health is. He's become an old senile man. And it's not clear whether or not the text is saying that with a sense of tragedy or a sense of resolution. The tragedy is that our great king just he's not a sexual person anymore. The point is, though, that King David is at the end of his life, and Ahashverosh is at the prime of his life. And so the narrator in the book of Esther is saying, is using deliberately the kind of phraseology that is found with King David, which happened centuries before. The narrator is alluding to that in order to convey a political truth. And the political truth is as follows. And here I'm quoting from this book called Esther in Ancient Jewish Thought, right? And it's by Aaron Kohler, scholar. David, in the last chapter of his life, is, I'm just sorry, my block is a pawn in the hands of shrewder operators around him. Adoniah, Bathsheba, and Nathan are all angling for power as David's life comes to an end. At the beginning of Kings, the book of Kings, David himself occupies a strange position. All acknowledge that his word is law, but all agree that he is incompetent, actually, to make decisions. The game becomes one of manipulation. The one who can best manipulate the king, who wields the power but is actually just a puppet, will emerge the victor in this game. This, according to Esther, is always the reality in Shushan. It will be Haman who at first plays this game most successfully, but he will later be bested at his own game by Mordecai and Esther. And that's the point. So the point is that you have here a subtext when when on the one hand, when the lads say, let's get young virgins, you see their own, self-interest here. On the other hand, the subtlety is that the narrator's playing with us, and the narrator's saying, we're going to echo the David story by using virtually the same language, and we're going to make the contrast apparent to the reader who is aware of this. The reader is aware that David was at the end of his life and really kind of incapable of making decisions. He was a politically weak figure, and everybody around him was manipulating him and asserting power in manipulation. That's what happens when you have a weak leader at the top. That's what happens when you have, and it's the 23rd Amendment, right? And the Constitution. Don't mean to be too political here, except for saying that the Constitution of the United States anticipates this circumstance when the president is incapable of discharging the president's duties. What happens? What are the mechanisms? Well, God forbid that should happen. And of course, we all fear, in present circumstances, in either way, this as an eventuality. Who exercises power over the figure at the top who is incompetent, who's incapable of exercising power? Well, just, God forbid that should ever happen. Watch and see who is trying to exercise that power and what their own interests are and how they manipulate the situation. Now, the Constitution, we got to give the founders credit because they anticipate, well, it's actually the amendment, but they anticipate that there's a chain of command. And so even, and the reason why there's a chain of command that's written into the Constitution is because it wants to anticipate the fact that you can have unsavory forces outside of the constitutional structure that can come and usurp power. And they wanted to, because they understood that so well, they tried in every way to prevent that from happening, such that no general, no governor, no other person from another political echelon could come in, barge in, and take over and have a coup d'état. They understood that would be the dissolution of the country, but and that it would be completely antithetical to the kind of country that they wanted to establish, which was not a dictatorial monarchy, but a constitutional republic. Ilana, go ahead.
One of the Dinei Melech in the Torah says that the king should not have too many wives.
That's right. So that's Book of Deuteronomy.
It will take him away from doing a good job. And also, Amelech Shlomo, what about him?
Shlomo is the perfect example of the failures. Look, the argument that is made among people who study the Bible critically is that the book of Deuteronomy is in a way a kind of smackdown to Solomon, because Solomon violated all the rules in Deuteronomy. Solomon not only had all these allegiances and marriages, the marriages were political marriages, diplomacy, but it was all about wealth and power. And so the Deuteronomy is the first legislation in civilization that is putting a series of checks and balances on what could have been total power, right? And the fact that the king has to be subordinate to the Torah really is the most important one of that. But the Deuteronomy understands the limitations of human power. Go ahead, John.
Well, in Joseph Heller's great novel about King David, I think it's called God Knows,
God knows, right?
Solomon is portrayed as an idiot.
That's true. Yes. And it's interesting. It's not that hard to picture that. I love King Solomon and love the character very, very much, but understand that there's a lot of weakness here. And it stems from just a basic reality, which is, what do you do when your father's David? You know, your father is the most beloved, interesting character in the whole book. Okay. Moses, he's up there. The patriarch, they're all up there. But King David is the most fully formed, the richest character in the whole book. And then you're Solomon. And this dilemma affects everybody who is a child of a superlative individual. I just saw an interview with Jason Streisand, or Jason Gould, the son of Barbara Streisand. Okay. How do you live your life as the son of Barbara Streisand? Okay. And it's a burden. It's a terrible burden. You want to run away from it. And then part of your whole life is accepting the fact that you are the child of royalty. And then you figure out your own path. And Solomon has that thing. And Solomon has another advantage, is that I think while Joseph Heller makes him out to be adult, he does have some native talents on his own. Go ahead, Bob.
So you often invite us to live within the story.
Yes.
And I'm wondering what happens if we flip that and say, how does this story live within each of us? And specifically, as I read that, the King Ahashverosh in us, the Vashti in us, the Haman in us, the Esther in us, the Mordecai in us. And I think that for me, and I want to make some random comments about connecting this to Vayikra, the question is also, as he makes his decision about Vashti, if I were him, would I be feeling, am I being overly arrogant? Am I having appropriate humility? How am I going to, dealing with John's comment about relationships with each other, that I read these as almost a psychodrama of ourselves. If we were there, how would we be reacting in these circumstances? And that's where it takes me back to the question of, I just finished hearing a wonderful shiur from a Sephardic rabbi on the word Vayikra and Vayikar,
Yes.
and about chance and coincidence and expected things. And since Hashem is invisible in all of this, the events are not just random as it seems to be, but is there a guiding hand behind all of this going on? And I was thinking back to your comment about Hashem shrinking into a space, right, and the small aleph that follows Vayikra is the shrinkage as well of the person and making space for things to come in. And the final piece that I've always been enthralled by was a recent thing about Hanukkah and Purim, about what is different or similar between the dreidel and the grogger. and that the dreidel spins from above with sort of a supernatural, if you will, thing, whereas the grogger, you spin it from below, which is human agency in terms of doing things. And so it's very interesting to me that the positioning of these parshiot and stories, that they could possibly connect in peculiar ways.
Well, it's
What
always I we're always reading on multiple levels, and
right?
of course, was it Freud who said, when we dream, we're all the characters in the dream, and when we read a story, we're all the characters in the story, and it is a great leap of empathy that is intended among readers and listeners to identify with each of the characters, you know, um, and we can take that in many directions. But we often, as I said at the beginning, we have a tendency to read this as only as farce and only as comedy, um, and not and that makes us very distant from the characters. But if we try and inhabit the characters, we then have to reconcile the fact that you know there are tendencies in each one of us that take advantage of people, that manipulate people, that are vulnerable to people, that act in more base ways than we would like, and then the real question for our own introspection is, you know, who are we? What are we? Um, and so, the easy answer is we're all the characters. I'll give you a Passover analogy, which is accessible, which is when we read the story, when we read the passage about the four children, the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the one who doesn't know how to ask. We might want to identify with one of them, but the deeper meaning is, as you know, that there's a bit of each of those characters in all of us, and that at any given time in our lives we gravitate to them. I'd like to think that we would not want to gravitate to Haman in the story, but every one of us knows that we all know different characters who behave like Haman. We all know Jews who behave like Haman because they're so despicable, and not Jews, but we know people who behave like Haman. And we may have people in our lives who are despicable people. We may have people in our lives who are like loathsome. Okay, I'm exaggerating. Nobody's a Haman. But then, on the deeper level of we flatter ourselves if we think that we're always going to be the kindly good person, right? I like the Cynthia Ozick's critique of all of those who make Anne Frank into their hero, right? They identify with the Diary of a Young Girl, and especially that her line that is so misquoted, which is, I still believe that people are good, which is a line that she is writing and hiding. A few days before, people terrorized her and tore her out of her attic and then brought her to Bergen-Belsen, and then she was murdered. Okay, so the question then is, well, if she had survived, do you think she would have still said, that? It's a kind of ridiculous question, and so we have a tendency to flatter ourselves, thinking that we identify with the saintly kindness, kind parts, kind characters. We like to identify with the Esthers and Mordecai, but not the Hamans and Ahashveroshes. The deeper reading here is that, you and me to confront that there's some ugliness. We all carry certain ugly. I mean,
Yeah, one other comment I just texted you, and I hadn't been aware of this, that there are many in the LGBTQ community, as I understand it, that have embraced the Purim story as also being a discussion of sexuality, sexual politics, identity, and all the discussion about the eunuchs and about Vashti and Esther. There are playwrights apparently writing very interesting stories connecting this to their own experiences with coming out, with costumes, with identity, with hiddenness. And so I had not been aware of this, but was curious if you knew anything
I
about
don't. I'm not aware of it, and of course, uh, different kinds of approaches. It's a classic text, and therefore, as a classic text, anybody with a certain set of tools and agenda will find anything that they want in the text. It's doubtful that as it's in its origins that this text is about that. But these themes, if you can find these themes and argue them and bring them out as an argument, then of course they're part of a conversation. We've had this discussion about Joseph. Joseph, the when uh, readers today read the Joseph story, especially young readers, they'll see Joseph as a gay character, right off the bat, and for all sorts of reasons that are both caricaturistic and comical, but also serious. Well, that's not the way that we have understood the Joseph story, coming down the millennia. But door door shove. Every generation has its own peculiar bents, and this, of course, is one of the great one of the angles of this particular generation that may have been more concealed in early generations, or just simply not addressed, not known. God, John.
Well, considering what has just been said and how the story is considered a farce to a large extent, I think we have to remember it ends in a massacre. And it's
Right.
the
So you would say that it's a massacre, and of course this is what charges this story in the contemporary context, and that the idea that it's a massacre, this is a debate. The Jews read it carefully. Jews are given the permission to defend themselves. And this is the now the polemical reading of the book of Esther post October the 7th. Okay, and this is why it's a very charged. It can be a very volatile, charged book, and perhaps we'll talk about this, which is to say that Ahashverosh has a decree in the end of the book. He's not able to reverse Haman's decree. Okay, this is the peculiarity. It's not so peculiar, but it's the theme of the book is that the king issues an edict and can't reverse it. Okay, and the king is bound by the edict, and the edict is set, and the date for their war is set. But the king gives permission for the Jews to defend themselves, and in defending themselves, they kill those people who want to kill them. And that is not a massacre. That is self-defense. They do not plunder their victims. They defend themselves. The sheer magnitude of the thousands, it's like 75,000 that are killed, is not wanton killing, it's defense. It only tells you that the edict of Haman in the story, as outlandish as this might sound, and it's so scandalous to a modern set of ears, right? But it's not scandalous to the Bible, and it's not scandalous, in my opinion, post October 7th, that there are genocidal people out there that want to kill every single Jew, and they will not stop at that, and they will risk their own lives for the sake of killing other Jews. And here, Ahashverosh gives the powerless Jews in his realm the power to defend themselves, and guess what? They do. And so here we are. This is the polemical reading of this. Here we are, 5 months after the most heinous massacre committed against Jews since the Holocaust, and Jews have a state and power and are defending themselves. And the world, of course, is criticizing Jews for that because it's not matching their moral sensibilities in terms of the loveliness of it. You're supposed to defend yourself and not kill anybody in the process. It's supposed to be kind of hermetic, and that's ridiculous. So
no, the question is, I don't know the text at the end, but does the text make clear it does not go beyond self-defense?
So again, this is where where people find it scandalous is because they interpret it that way, and where people say no, it's actually not. So we'll have to look at that, and we'll leave that for another analysis. Okay. And in the meantime, we've gone over, but that's okay. So next week,